So I'm going to start the presentation with a question for you. And I think you can just raise your hand if you agree with this or not. And please answer this as quickly and spontaneously, not overthinking it. So if we can go to the next slide. The question is, should we try to eliminate or reduce, at least reduce the stress in our lives? So just a yes or no question. If you say yes, raise the hand. Okay, you can either do it that way or the raised hand function in reactions. Okay. Well, it looks like we got a pretty unanimous or complete agreement on that we should try to reduce our stress. So as we go on, just to warn you, since I do have a scientific background and, we're teaching in public health, I am going to go through some of the science behind this. And please let me know if I talk too fast for translators. I'll try to remember to slow down. Hey, Christian, if we can go on to the next slide, please. Well, first of all, what is stress? And Hans Selye made the point to distinguish between what causes the stress and the stress reaction. So the term stressor means that which causes the stress. What is the event? You're having a fight with somebody, you have work due, you have you have an accident to avoid, whatever is the cause, that's the stressor. That can be many different causes. Stress is pretty much a non-specific response. In other words, the reaction you have to the stressor is pretty much the same. Its intensity may vary, but it's the same physiological thing, same thing happening in your body and mind. Okay, if we can go on to the next slide. So in terms of the answer to the question, some stress, yes, sometimes you want to avoid certain stressors. And I listed some here. Other causes of stress normally don't cause much problem. For instance, gravity. We live with it all the time. However, if you have poor posture, gravity is going to cause you a backache. And of course, if you have poor balance and fall over, then gravity is a problem. And then there's a lot of psychological factors. So in general, and this will, I think, hopefully come clear in the talk, we actually don't want to avoid stress. We want to manage the stress reaction. Okay? Because if you try to avoid all the stressors, you're not going to do anything. Life will be boring and you won't feel accomplished. So in order to do things, in order to challenge ourselves, we need to meet stressors. So the point is to, how are we going to meet that? Okay, so if we can go on, Christian, next slide. This is from, shared by the New York State Department of Health, which I'm still, or was employed by. And this is 5 things to know. First, everybody is affected by stress. Not all stress is bad. Long-term stress can harm your health. There are ways to manage stress. And of course, if you simply are overwhelmed, ask for help. So we can go on. One of the reasons we feel stress is change. Everything changes. And I assume the translators are able to translate. I'm not going to read everything. But this change always requires us to adapt. So just being alive is a continual state of flux. Of course, this has a problem that we have to always adjust, but also as a problem when things aren't going so well. This too shall pass. So let's go on. I want to introduce the concept, important concept of homeostasis. So basically, as our external environment, temperatures, food, how often you eat, and such, particularly when food was not available from the refrigerator 24/7, we had to go periods without food. Our bodies, though, want to maintain an internal environment that's pretty stable. And that's what evolved a set of sophisticated regulatory mechanisms that keeps the internal environment stable. That's what is meant by homeostasis. In terms of our mind, our homeostasis is pretty much when we're feeling in tune with the world. And of course, some examples of very tightly regulated internal systems: your body temperature, blood pH, levels of glucose, etc. And your body has built-in repair mechanisms. So your body knows what to do. It's our minds that don't know what to do. So the next slide, please. And all this happens without our having to think about it. And this becomes a term, what's called resilience. The fact that our bodies tend to go to resilience, meaning recovery from things that need to be adjusted from that constant change in the environment, and stability. Those are allies when it comes to facing stress. Our bodies will give us signals. So learn to listen to your body, particularly when you're feeling stressed. If we can go on to the next slide, please. However, these internal mechanisms can be overwhelmed. Poor diet, substance abuse. If the environment is too extreme, for instance, if you are in the Arctic without a coat on, your body's probably not going to be able to maintain temperature very long. In fact, in ocean water, people can only survive about 30, 40 minutes. The normal temperatures, at least in deep ocean and in the northern environments, your body just cannot maintain it. So extreme environments, and then psychological factors. If the stress is too much, the mental stress on us is too much, we can end up with depression, extreme anxiety, and these, of course, are where our homeostasis is somewhat breaking down or having trouble bringing us back to balance. How is this rate of talking for the translators? We okay?
I think it's working, yeah.
Okay, good, thank you. Could we go on to the next slide, please? So some stress we think of as good, great. Let's say you graduate from a college or a training or a primary school. That's a happy event, but then you need to find out what to do, maybe get a job. So then all of a sudden that eustress, it's called, leads to stress. Marriage, another happy adjustment occasion. Then you have to adjust to living with somebody. And marriage partners, they change with time, and we have to coordinate that time. Promotion at work, new responsibilities. So eustress still requires adaptation. Happy events still require you to adapt, and if you don't, then they can become distressed. Okay, so good, thank you. So the other thing here is to start to value the stress response. It's there for a reason. I think when we evolve that to avoid danger, get resources that we need, It gets us moving to deal with a situation. In fact, the stress response is part of homeostasis. It's our body telling us, hey, you need to get away from that cliff or avoid that tiger in the woods, in the forest. So the stress response is there to get our attention. And we'll come back to this, but it's part of the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic means you don't think about it. It happens. It happens without our conscious awareness. And it needs to, because sometimes we need to switch and respond quickly. So if you had to think about it and overthink a situation, let's say you're driving your car and all of a sudden somebody pulls out in front of you. You don't have time to think, well, should I do this or should I do that? You react in a way to avoid the danger. And I remember once up in our climate, roads can be very icy. Years ago, my car started skidding when I was going quickly. I just turned the wheel the right direction. I didn't think about it. It happened. So that's the autonomic nervous system. And it's the one, it has two branches. The sympathetic initiates the stress response. But if we're always stressed, that is the problem. And that's what we're going to get into. So we have a way to deactivate the stress response. And that's the parasympathetic nervous system. Rest and digest. Next slide, please. Some of the things the sympathetic nervous system does gets us ready to act. Our heart rate jumps, heightened perception, your eyes dilate more, blood flow to the muscles. Other things like digestive system are shut down. If you need to escape the tiger, you don't need to digest food. If the tiger catches you, the tiger will digest the food for you. So, and then of course the rapid nervous system firings, set of hormone release, surge of energy. It's like this, it's this energy that we can't sustain. We need to turn it off. And if we can't turn off the sympathetic nervous system, that is the problem. And that's what we're going to get to. So, and then the so-called hypothalamus or HPA axis, hypothalamus pituitary limbic. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, in the modern world, though, we're not usually escaping tigers or hunting food. We're usually there's social things going on, economic. Often a lot of it is social political. Getting along with other people to do things like projects you're on. You have to work with other people. Our own thoughts and feelings can cause stress. Real or perceived threats to our social status and threats to our self-identity. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Acute and chronic. Acute means it happens, it's temporary, but then it's deactivated. Of course, if acute is too strong, that can cause a problem. So intense activity resolved in a relatively short amount of time, such as avoiding a car accident or other dangers. Chronic stress affects us over longer periods of time, and this is the major problem in our modern society. Let's say, at work, you're having some trouble with colleagues. You go home. It doesn't really leave your mind, often for many, many folks. And this fact that you never completely turn off the sympathetic nervous system, that's the problem. And that modern stressors tend to be more chronic than acute, don't they? Problems with family, problems with employment, problems in projects you're trying to do, even nonprofit organizations. So let's go on to the next slide. please. And this can cause a cycle. First of all, the stress response is meant to be uncomfortable because it wants to get us moving. It wants to get us doing something. If we're comfortable, well, okay, I'll just sit here in my stress and it'll be great. But no, it's supposed to get us moving. And then if it doesn't resolve, if we're not able to resolve that situation to our satisfaction, this uncomfortable feeling of the stress response can in itself become a stressor. And so we get this feedback loop that can break down. And the following slide is an illustration from a book called Full Capacity Living. That's an error. That should be chapter 19, not 9. I'll go on to the next slide, which is just this illustration, which you may or may not see. So again, the stress reaction can be external events or internal thoughts. Your thoughts can cause that. It activates this fight or flight. Hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals, they're all involved. Then if it doesn't get resolved, you get this chronic hyperarousal. Keep going. This can lead to headaches, backaches, anxiety, panic, and this again leads to stress. This is the cycle we're talking about. So we try to adapt. But a lot of the ways we adapt in modern society are what's called maladaptive. So look how much time I have. And then eventually the whole thing breaks down. Okay, depression, burnout, it can even lead to heart attacks and other, you can make yourself sick on the stress reaction. So let's go on, because I have some other things I wanted to say. Here's some of those maladaptive coping mechanisms. Denial. No, I'm not stressed. Just work all the time. Busyness. Just keep myself moving, even if it isn't productive. Food's a big one, isn't it? Sedatives. And then from the nutrition, type of food we eat, sugars, fats, salts, the so-called SOS, comfort food. Okay, that's the nutrition piece. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, remember the digestive systems turn off, and then I don't know, is there more? There should be more here. Yeah. Okay, that's really related to digestion, elevated blood pressure, which of course is a problem, decreased immune function, autoimmune, so-called inflammatory, irritability. Okay. So chronic stress is a problem, as you see. I'm not going to read all of them. So how do we deal with that? Let's go on to the next slide and see what I said. There are people who, everybody knows, really productive people who seem to thrive on stress. First of all, they see these stressors as opportunities rather than problems. They are able to turn off the stress response, which is what I want to really talk about in the rest of the talk. Meaning you're able to sleep. It's sort of like intensely involved in what you need to be involved in, then shut it off. Okay. Sort of work hard, play hard. Of course, playing can cause stress too, but in a relaxed way. That when you're done, you can become fully relaxed. Or take a break. The feeling of control. Now you can't control everything, but you have more control often than you think when you're stressed, and you can control how you react to events. Okay, let's go on. So in the meditation introduction, Dada mentioned the word awareness. Awareness is key. When you are aware of your stress reaction, this changes everything. Allow yourself to feel threatened or fearful or angry, and just recognize these thoughts. They happen. You don't have to believe your thoughts. And when you stop and maybe observe your thinking, things just come and go, don't they? feelings and sensations, none of this is permanent. It's passing. Hey, this event's causing me stress. I feel it in my body. Once you're aware, then you have a choice to react or not react. It isn't automatic. You don't just go, and sometimes I'm sure we all have regretted reacting automatically. Okay, can we go on to the next? It also gives your judgment, whether threats are real, actual threats, or things more to do with your state of mind. A trust, things will work out. And this is, I think, where the spiritual dimension comes in, but I'll let you chime in on that in the breakout rooms. But once you're calm, when you're in panic mode, it's hard to think clearly. It's hard to be creative. So responding then allows you to it helps you break out of the stress reaction cycle. And of course, reduces dependencies on those maladaptive the maladaptive coping strategies are attempts to feel better, but many of them have long-range consequences. Food, substance abuse, people who have addictions. Yeah, they feel great in the moment. It's afterwards that the problems come. Next slide, please. And then this is again from Dr. Kabat-Zinn. And instead of getting into this cycle, you can go off. This is for the awareness. And Dr. Zinn uses mindfulness, but the meditations, mantra-based meditations, are also very good. They allow you to create awareness of what's going on, particularly if you also practice yoga postures. You become more sensitive to where the messages your body is sending you. Can we have the next slide, please? I want to emphasize, though, because I teach students, I assign my students to report every week. They have to hand in a daily log of whether they meditate or not. And sometimes and then they have comments. And sometimes I get well, I didn't meditate today because I wasn't feeling stressed. So that's why the second point is in bold. If you don't meditate when you're not stressed, then it's not going to be there for you when you are. Okay? So again, if you're not meditating when you don't think you need it, but just doing it every day, then you're not going to have the skill to make use of it when you do need it. So meditation is something that needs to be done daily. And I say I have college students doing this, and they can tell me, they can tell me if they don't meditate, they have to tell me why they didn't. And that's where I get these comments. Because I can't force them to meditate, but I can force them to report, creating their awareness of whether or not they did maintain that practice. And again, develop the skill. And I think this is, to be skillful at anything, sports, music, whatever, you need to practice. Doesn't mean that we'll never feel sadness, anger, or fear. We don't want to suppress emotions, rather work with them. I mean, the emotions are there for a reason. Having a little respect for our bodies and our minds, that these things are there for a purpose. Now let's go on. I think I get into some more specifics. So what are some stress managing? Physical activities, particularly the aerobic, and strength training also. And what Dr. Dean Ornish, who's very successful treating heart patients, says, what's the best physical activity? The one you enjoy, because that is one you will do. Yoga postures or asanas, there's actually preliminary studies that show that can help deactivate the stress reaction. And gratitude. So take just a minute now, each one of you, please, and think of 3 things that you're grateful for? Either something that went well today or this probably early morning for some of you, maybe yesterday or in the recent past. What are three things that you feel grateful for? And there's evidence for this, by the way, that these are based on studies. I assign this to students, and particularly on a hard day, sometimes students tell me, I had a really bad day, but I had lunch with somebody. So again, this can be something very simple. I connected with an old friend, had a phone call, or I'm grateful for my parents that they're there to when I needed them. There's much to be grateful for in life if we just take the time to remember. And of course, taking time off to relax, social things with family, friends, walks, whatever. Next slide, please. Some of those psychological factors affecting stress, how you see things. Optimism, pessimism. This, I think, is where the gratitude comes in. Then the feeling control we talked about, is helplessness is actually a very toxic emotion. Emotions can be toxic. Anger is another one. Be open to humor, sense of coherence. These are all things I got from the New York State Department of Health. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about work by Dr. Kristen Neff, who's a professor at University of Texas, Austin, on self-compassion. And it's amazing how many people in our Western societies, or maybe throughout the world, are so harsh on themselves. We're our own harshest critics. And it doesn't work, because when you self-criticize, well, your body wants to defend yourself. So you become both the defender and the attacker. And you get into this weird cycle. So self-kindness is one of the three components of her self-compassion. Common humanity. To be human is to be imperfect. We will all make mistakes. Okay? I like to think of mistakes as learning experiences. Okay, it's not that I screwed up. Well, I messed up because I didn't know something. Now I learned something. And here's some references to Dr. Neff. The next slide is just about what self-compassion is not. It's not self-esteem. There's a big self-esteem movement, but self-esteem is about ego. It's about how am I better than everyone else? Where self-compassion is, how am I the same? How do I share with humanity? Self-pity. That's when you get immersed in your own problems. Whereas with self-compassion, you realize we're all in this together. We all have problems. And self-indulgence, which, is maladaptive. Maladaptive coping strategies, and that's not treating yourself kindly. And again, I don't know if these, if any of this will get shared, but these are web links. But you can go to Kristen Neff and find out some of her work. And this is just one of many people. I'll go on to the next slide, please. Okay, a lot of what I gave was from this book, Full Catastrophe Living, Dr. Kabat-Zinn. He's run a stress management clinic in UMass Boston. He's really a pioneer in this work. And although, like me, he was trained as a biochemist, he, is really a pain management was the original outlook for it. And so a lot of the references are for him. Another reference for you is Dr. Dean Ornish, who, as I say, has worked with cardiac patients. But some of these same methods help in other of the major diseases in our society, including cancer and diabetes.